attivisti di Anonymous for the Voiceless. Sono lietissima di avervi qua, sono felicissima del fatto che siete in tanti italiani, ma ho il piacere anche di avere qua gli attivisti di Malta e della Georgia, una rappresentanza di entrambi i capitoli di questi due stati e ne sono molto felice. Inoltre abbiamo degli ospiti che vengono da altri stati, attivisti, RO, organizzatori. Grazie mille per essere qui, di cuore. Oggi abbiamo il piacere di avere con noi Paul ed Asal per un workshop nuovo dedicato alla nostra formazione, una cosa importantissima perché dobbiamo arrivare alle persone e quindi dobbiamo affinare giorno dopo giorno le tecniche per farci comprendere, per responsabilizzare i non vegani e far terminare questo tremendo olocausto. Siamo con il cuore tutti siamo con il cuore amareggiato in questo periodo, ancora più del solito se possibile. Oggi, durante il briefing, faremo un minuto di silenzio proprio per questa causa, per i maiali che sono stati uccisi all'interno di un rifugio, un precedente pericolosissimo che rischia di ostacolare la strada che stava percorrendo il nostro lavoro. Io vi chiedo una cosa, con tutto il cuore, utilizzate la rabbia che avete, il dolore che avete, mettetela a frutto in quello che noi possiamo fare per il bene degli animali, altrimenti sarebbe energia sprecata. Cerchiamo di ottenere lucidità, trattenere le lacrime, nel momento dell'azione andiamo avanti, responsabilizziamo i non vegani, continuiamo questo lavoro sempre meglio. Lo sapete che siamo efficaci, lo avete riscontrato tantissime volte. Continuiamo così, sempre più numerosi. Mi raccomando, quando parlate con le persone, invitatele ad unirsi a noi. Dobbiamo crescere esponenzialmente. Non è sufficiente che rimaniamo noi e continuiamo a parlare con le persone che magari cambiano, ma restano con le mani in mano. Restare fermi, non fare attivismo, significa mettersi dalla parte dell'oppressore. Dobbiamo farci sentire ogni giorno, in ogni occasione, durante i cubi, principalmente, e in ogni occasione della vita. Io non mi dilungo perché voglio lasciare tutto lo spazio a Paul ed Asal, quindi adesso lascio la parola a Paul inizialmente e grazie mille a entrambi per il workshop che ci state per fornire. Grazie davvero.
Ciao. It is fantastic to be here. I cannot really believe that I'm here. It's been a long time coming. We were supposed to be here in 2020, but as you know, the pandemic changed those plans. But here we are, and it's great to see you all here present and ready to take on this action today. I'm going to start by sharing a little bit of a story about this organization for those of you who may be new, or even if you have been a part of this organization for a little bit, it would be a good idea to just sort of go through some of our journey up until this point. But before I do that, I do see some seats at the front that could be filled. I see 2 seats at the front. So let me just talk to you about AV and how we got started. Asal and I started AV in Burke Street Mall in Melbourne City in Australia. And we started by getting out onto the streets, just simply wanting to do street outreach. by using a form of activism that we had seen by another organization or another group. And the idea was to wear masks and to show slaughterhouse footage to the public and to convey the message of what's really happening to these animals at the hands of humans, and then to use that footage as context for interactions that we could then convince people to go vegan with. And our goal has not changed, but we have gotten a lot more effective and we have evolved a lot in terms of how we achieve that goal. Over the course of 17 actions on the street in Burke Street Mall, we formulated what is now known as the Cube of Truth. In the beginning, it wasn't called a Cube of Truth. We called it Thousand Eyes Experience, and we also had a virtual reality element which we got rid of. And we didn't just start doing cubes initially, we started doing lines and we started doing all kinds of shapes and sizes. And we've played around with many different ideas. With regards to outreach, we have also tried so many different approaches on how we can speak to people in an effective way. And I think it's safe to say we've tried almost everything that you probably know of in terms of communication styles and ways to convince people. So what we're presenting to you today comes from vast experience, not just from Asal and I, but from our vantage point, what we have learned vicariously through thousands upon thousands of activists around the world. We have also learned from activists that have done this long before us and have laid out the foundation for what we now know as the animal rights movement. And we've pulled all of this wisdom together, and this workshop will be a presentation that brings all of that together for you. So I hope that you all pay attention and you absorb as much of this as possible. And when we go out there today, you implement everything that you've learned, and you carry that over to any other future actions that you're going to be doing, whether it's on the streets or your general interactions you have with non-vegans, or even your interactions with other vegans, because many vegans don't seem to focus very strongly on the most effective way to do this, or that maybe they're just not aware. So we're going to get really lasered in on exactly how we have learned to achieve that. In 2019, we reached our biggest point as an organization. We had 1,011 chapters around the world, and we had a very big task on our hands to manage all of those chapters. And we had, at that point, we had 26 paid staff members working with AV and a large sponsor that was helping us to empower the organization. In 2020, during the pandemic, there was some controversy around this organization because we decided to make a social media post speaking out against the BLM movement for using pigs' heads to convey the message of fuck the police. And we said, you cannot be fighting oppression while using oppression. That makes no sense. And we got told, now's not the appropriate time. And we asked, when is the appropriate time? And because we took this stance, and by the way, we were the only organization or any body with an influence within the animal rights movement who spoke out against this, we caused a lot of hate towards the organization. But this is one of the things that we stand behind, because we are not here to be popular necessarily. We are here to speak up for the animals, even when it is inconvenient to do so. And because of this social media post, we essentially had our funding cut from this sponsor, which meant we lost our staff members. And we also lost a lot of chapters, not only due to that, but because of the pandemic itself, causing the animal rights movement to become largely inactive. It's only really this year that I'm starting to see the animal rights movement picking back up its traction and getting back on its feet, and I'm really glad to see that. But in terms of this organization, what I'm now seeing is that we have a lot more quality in our activism, and the activists that participate in the cubes and the organizers that we have who represent the values of this organization, as opposed to the quantity. So we focus way more on quality than quantity in this organization ever since we reached that point of realizing that we may not always be liked by everybody, but what needs to happen is that we stand by our values 100%, and that means we are dedicated to the animals and their plight at the hands of humans 100%. So currently we are about 400 chapters around the world, but we are still the most global animal rights organization on the planet. We actually achieved that within about a year and a half of being active, since we started in April of 2016. And I want to share with you a recent manifestation that we're really proud about. And this is a chapter we just recently opened up in a part of the world that I didn't think we would open up a chapter in. I'll come over this side. These guys are in a city called Goma, which is in the Congo. Apparently, according to science, the Congo regions of Africa is exactly where the human species started. These guys are living in a very impoverished, a very poor situation. And look at these guys. Not only are they speaking up for animals in the context of their situation, but they're even doing the AV hand insignia correctly, which a lot of people don't get correct. And I want you to take a very good look at this, and I want you to remember, look at this guy's getting outreached on his way to work, seemingly. I want you to take a very good look at this, and I want you to remember this whenever somebody tries to tell you that not everybody can be vegan because they don't have access to plant foods. How many times have you heard that disgusting excuse? People trying to hide behind impoverished civilizations. Well, these guys are not only vegan, but they're animal rights activists. So if they can do it, what excuse do non-vegans have? As you can see by the background, this is not a city like Venice. This is a very poor part of the world. And I have to take a moment to also shout out some of the Italian activists who are here with us today for helping with a fundraiser to facilitate this chapter so that they can pay for their equipment. And they also have to pay a fee in order to do this work to the government there in the Congo. This is being helped by the activists here in Italy. Showing the same footage that we show here in Italy, in Australia, all around the world, because it doesn't matter where it's happening. It doesn't matter if it's local or it's abroad. At the end of the day, what we're showing is the standard practices of what happens to animals at the hands of humans. And the context is the only thing that matters in order for us to have the conversation with people. Now I'm going to show you a group in Argentina. Now, the activists in Argentina have been doing a phenomenal job because they really understand the values of this organization. They take their work very seriously, and what I'm specifically showing you here is the way that they conduct themselves. When it comes to the cube of truth, we have two elements. We have the cube itself, and then we have the outreach. And the organizers have a very specific task and a big responsibility of making sure that everything is orchestrated in the most effective manner. Can you just go back to that last one? So what I want to show you specifically here is the way that the activist is always facing forward. His head, even though the camera is pointing at him, he's not looking at the camera person, is he? Eyes forward at all times. Hands placed on the bottom of the screens, not on the corners, not on the sides, not on the top. Hands aren't hanging by his side like this. Hands aren't in pockets. They're holding the TVs. He's holding the TV in a very aesthetic manner. The screen is perfectly straight and also perfectly flat, which means it's ideal for anyone of any height to see the screen, and it's not just ideal for short people or tall people, right? The posture of this activist is always straight. And this is what we would call a one-person cube, which, by the way, if you're an organizer or if you're a part of a chapter where you only have one person holding a screen, this can be very effective. Don't think it can't be effective. Okay, let's go to the next one. So this is a 8-person cube with 8 TVs. This is a location they do the cube in quite often. So again, very aesthetic. The cube is very tight and tidy. They understand exactly how important it is to take all the little details seriously. So once again, all the activists are looking straight forward at all times. Postures are very straight. The screens are all straight. The angle is perfect. They're also flat. And of course, you can see the outreach interactions happening around. No one is standing too close to the screens, which means the screens aren't being blocked. Let's go to the next one. Another 8-person cube. As you can see from the corner, it's nice and sharp. Again, everyone looking nice and straight, always looking forward, not looking around. Another good example of an 8-person cube with 8 screens with outreach happening all around it. Now, these guys are bystanders who wanted to get up close. In that case, you've got one other TV here that's available to be watched. So it's not so bad that these guys are standing here, but if this outreacher wanted to increase the visibility of all screens, the activists could have asked, perhaps, and maybe they did, I don't know, could have asked the bystanders to stand back just a little bit in order to enable others to see the screens. But as you can see around, everyone is sort of standing at a good distance from the cube while they're doing outreach. But once again, everybody's looking straight forward, straight with their postures. Everything about this is to be taken seriously. Next slide. And this is a 2-person cube. Now, the only thing that I would improve about this is the distance between the 2 cubers. This seems to be a speaker on the ground. And so I would ask this activist to stand back a little bit and maybe even a little bit back here. So basically they should be standing back to back so that it's as tight as it can be. All these little details matter. And I love seeing this. When we have kids or people that are shorter, getting down on their level while we talk, I think that's a really good look and it's good body language. Screen is also, once again, nice and flat. If that was pointing upward, it would only be good for tall people. If it was pointing down, it would only be good for short people. But that's not what's happening. And then we also have an activist here, standing, looking like he's available and ready to speak to other activists. Other bystanders, I mean. Next slide. So the hands on the screen here are a little bit on the corner, probably not the best example, but I want to show you that even though we're not perfect every time, we can always look for little ways to improve. So I would ask the activists to move their hands a little bit to the bottom of the screen. But all in all, this is about 95% perfect. Again, looking straight, posture straight, flat screen, the angle of the TV is perfect. And it also looks like those two activists are standing really close to each other, back to back. And this is a one-person cube. Again, I would ask them to put their hands on the bottom of the screen instead, but everything else is perfect about this. Do you want to pull up the hand positioning? Now, one of the things about AV is that some people say we are too strict, but I want to give you some perspective, okay? We have to remember that the animal rights movement is up against the meat, dairy, and egg industries, and they are some of the most powerful in the world. And there's an example of that here in Italy with regards to the 11 pigs that were killed. How the hell was that allowed to happen? Well, because the meat industry comes first, apparently, right? They have so much money and power, it is ridiculous. To think that we can get out onto the streets and do activism in a casual manner and not have strict protocol blows my mind if we think we're going to win. We don't have trillions of dollars. They do. We don't have some of the resources they do. Many of them, in fact. The least that we could do is get out onto the streets and operate in a way that is to be taken seriously. And as you should know, most vegans are not taken seriously by non-vegans. We have to change that. It is our responsibility to change that. The only way to achieve that is by operating and conducting ourselves in a professional manner. So the word is not too strict, the word is professional. The reason why we dress in all black is because what other color or shade is more fitting and appropriate? And here are some of the things that we take seriously, because one of the things I love to say is every 1% makes 100%. Are we here to be 98% effective? Or are we here to strive towards being 100% effective? So, example number 1, hands on the top of the TV. Now, you can see for yourselves, if you're being honest, that doesn't look very professional. It looks a little bit casual. So we would not recommend that you do this. In fact, at a cube, the organizer will ask you to put your hands like shown in number 2. As I've pointed out, this is the most ideal. Having your hands on the bottom of the screen, it shows that you're engaged. And it's very aesthetic. Hands on the corners looks a little bit too casual as well, not so professional. Now, number 4 is acceptable. I don't know why you would want to put your hands behind the TV. It doesn't seem very comfortable. But number 2 is still the most ideal out of these. Number 5, hands hanging by your side. Looking way too casual. This is probably the most lazy of them all. Hands on top of the screen. On the side really makes no sense. I don't know how this would be comfortable for anyone to have their hand positioned on the side of the screen. and hands in pockets. I mean, come on. You know? So just to reiterate, number 2 and number 4 would be, number 4 is acceptable, but number 2 is the most ideal hand positioning. You can also put your hands behind your back. If your hands are too long or it's uncomfortable for you to have your hands in position number 2, you can just place both of your hands behind your back, which is a strong position, I think. It's good body language. Okay, we'll go to the slides. So now we're going to get into some of the slides that we have. Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk to you sort of cut off. It's all right, I'll make it work. I'll make it work.
Like this? Or like how it was?
How it was. Okay, so just quickly, when we go out there today, and this is how you should be operating at a Cube of Truth in general, you all need to make yourselves available to be in the cube, unless you have some kind of condition that doesn't allow you to stand in the cube. It's important that we all work together like a team. And back to the whole professionalism thing. If you think of this like a sports team or like the army, if one person is acting casual and treating this like a social gathering and doing whatever they want, it affects the rest of the team. It affects the rest of the activists here. So be mindful of that. We all need to have hands on deck. We all need to be engaged. We all need to be taking this seriously. When you're at a Cube of Truth, you're not at a social gathering. You're there to do action for the animals. And perhaps you can do whatever you want at other animal rights actions, but at a Cube of Truth, we take this very seriously, so please keep that mindset when you're there. When you are in the cube, keep in mind all the things that we just spoke about. When you're holding a screen or you're holding a sign, let me talk about holding a sign really quickly and how that should be done. When you're holding a sign, your hands should be relaxed all the way by the sides of your body and holding the signs by the bottom of the sign, not the corner and not the sides. You want to rest your arms as close to your body as possible, and you want the sign to be flat up against your body. So it's not facing forward and it's not going to be on an angle that isn't ideal for the aesthetic. It's flat up against your body. All right? So don't hold the sign like this. Your elbows should not be bent. Your hands should be completely relaxed by your side. Okay? And I've already shown you how to hold the screen. But when it comes to a laptop, if there is a laptop that you'll be holding, you would have your hands out like this and just work with the organizers in making everything as aesthetic as possible. And the organizers will ask you to perhaps stand back, that's forward, back or forward, or standing to the side like this or this side. Please don't do it quickly, because it's hard for us to get the positioning perfect if you're like this and you're moving too quick for us. Just move slowly and only move in small increments, in small amounts. That way we can get the positioning just perfect. And believe me, it does matter how much it impacts the rest of the cube and how it looks. When you want to come out of the cube, you need to raise your hand. There's two things that we do. You would raise your hand like this if you want to come out of the cube and switch with somebody else. And if you see someone that hasn't been outreached yet, a bystander, non-vegan, vegan, who knows, but someone who needs to be outreached, raise your fist. And for all of the outreachers that are at a cube, if you notice someone in the cube who's raising their fist, that means you need to pay more attention. And you need to find exactly who that is and go over there and speak to them immediately. Again, if you need to switch out, you raise your hand like this. If you see someone who needs to be outreached, you raise your fist. If you're doing outreach, it's important that you're circulating the area. You're not just standing in clusters and talking to each other, and you're not just staying in one place, even if you are by yourself. You're constantly looking around. Who can be outreached? Who can be outreached? As soon as someone stops and starts looking at the footage, approach. And then we'll get into exactly how we should start the interaction in these slides. But just remember that you need to be circulating the area always and be aware of your surroundings so that you never miss an opportunity to outreach someone that may not only go vegan, but become an animal rights activist. And who knows, they may become the best animal rights activists on the planet based on that interaction. So never miss an opportunity. All right, so before we get into how to do animal rights outreach at a Cube of Truth, let's talk about veganism first, because it's important that we're all on the same page about what veganism actually means. If you ask a group of people what they think veganism means, especially non-vegans, but vegans are also included in this, you will most likely get multiple versions of what this means. And this means that the definition of veganism is not actually clear to people. Just to clarify, veganism has nothing to do with human health. Human health is just another way of saying human rights. It's your right to pursue well-being. This is not about your well-being. This is about non-human animal rights who are actually being oppressed by human beings. So it's incredibly distasteful and inappropriate for you to be conflating the conversation about animal rights with human rights. Human rights is a separate conversation. If you want to talk about how healthy plants are to eat, that is a completely separate conversation. And by the way, I say that as someone who cares about that in my personal life. I like to eat healthy. I like to be healthy. But I never conflate that with animal rights and what veganism, the word vegan, actually means. And we also need to clarify that veganism has nothing to do with human rights in general. It has nothing to do with the affection that humans have or don't have towards animals. It is only about justice for non-human animals. This is a justice movement, so it doesn't matter if you don't like animals. There are many animals that I don't really like. I don't care if I like them or not. It's just like you have the right to be hated by other people in this world, but they don't have the right to harm you as a result. You could be hated, you could be the most hated person, but nobody has the right to steal your rights away from you based on that. So even if you don't like animals, even if you don't love animals, at the end of the day, we need to respect their right, and their rights, and we're only talking about basic rights here, such as the right to freedom and the right to not be oppressed. The core of a successful outreach interaction is centered around holding individuals accountable for what they're personally responsible for. Everything else is details. If anybody here is not comfortable with holding non-vegans accountable, this is not the workshop for you. What is the point of talking to non-vegans about animal rights and veganism if you're not holding them accountable? It makes no sense. What is animal rights outreach? At its base, outreach is speaking up for the victims in the same way that you would want to be spoken up for if you were in the animal's position. How would you want to be spoken up for if you were about to be killed in a slaughterhouse. When you're doing outreach, it is about being a medium of truth. You are simply a voice for the animals and a medium of truth. And you are enacting change by prioritizing the victims and not the oppressors. So again, if you're focusing on human health, you're prioritizing the oppressors. If you aren't speaking up for the animals in the same way that you would want to be spoken up for, if you were in the animal's position, then you're not doing the animals justice. Again, the core of a successful outreach interaction is centered around holding individuals accountable for what they're personally responsible for. Some people ask us, well, how do you know that you're being effective? How do you measure success at a Cube of Truth? Or how do you know that your outreach is actually getting through to people? Well, there's only 4 things that we can really control, we've come to learn. And we used to count tallies. We used to have tallies at the end of a Cube of Truth. We would go around in the debriefing and ask everybody, how many people did you get to go vegan? And then at the end, we would tally them up and say, yes, we got 87 people to go vegan. But what we realize is that a lot of people lie about their numbers and they say, yeah, I got 17 people today. And really, these are just people that were pandering to you and saying, oh, try to do something about this. Oh, think about it. And then we think, oh, yeah, they're going vegan. This isn't accurate. It's a waste of time measuring success this way. So we got rid of the tallies. There's only 4 things you can control, okay? Number 1 is what you say to people. Number 2 is how you say those things to people, which isn't as important as what you say, but it is still important. Number 3 is who you are saying these things to, because not everybody is reachable. Not everybody is going to listen. It is your job to assess whether that person is reachable or not. And the last thing is how long you are speaking to people about this. Because if you continue going on and on and on and on and on and on, people are going to think that this is a complex issue, that there's a lot to consider. This is a very simple equation. And it is your job to set the correct tone when you speak to people, because if you don't make it sound simple, if you don't leave them with the feeling that this is as simple as anything that they could possibly consider in the world, then what makes you think that they're going to go vegan immediately? And that's what we're trying to achieve, isn't it? We're trying to have them go vegan right now. So always remember that you will never have a 100% success rate with animal rights outreach. You need to accept that many people you speak with will not go vegan. They may even sound like they will go vegan, but just remember, you can only control those 4 things, and that's it. There is no magic set of words to use during outreach that will make someone go vegan. If they're ready, they'll listen, and if they're not ready, they won't. It's that simple. Your function as an activist is to hold the individual that you're speaking with accountable for the animal abuse that they're responsible for. And abuse is probably too weak of a word. We're talking about the worst violence in the world, the worst form of violence and discrimination. We're talking about torture, enslavement. We're talking about rape. And we're talking about murder. Next. So what we mean by planting seeds, a lot of vegans use this term and say, well, I planted some seeds, I'm planting seeds. What we mean when we use that term is that the bystander that you're speaking with, non-vegans, who you speak with, leave the interaction knowing that they are personally responsible for what we're showing on the screens and that they must be vegan. Anything else is not morally justifiable. Most people think that seed planting is just verbally leafleting, just talking about information. Did you know that? Did you know that? Did you know that? Did you know this? Most non-vegans don't need much information. They sort of already know what's going on. The context of the screen is important to remind them and put this in their face because they're usually ignoring it. But everybody sort of knows that an animal has to be killed in order for an animal to end up on their plate. Telling them about how old chickens are before they get killed and how old a baby calf is before they're sent to the slaughterhouse and killed for veal, and telling them male chicks are killed in the egg industry. That should only be about 5 to 10% of your whole interaction. So information is important, but it's the smallest part of the interaction if you want to have an effective interaction. The bulk of your conversation, the focus, most of that conversation, 90% of the conversation should be focused on holding the individual accountability, because when you're just giving people information, that lacks individual accountability. It's just food for thought, right? We don't want to give people food for thought. We want to give people a call for action, food for action, immediate action. Next slide. This is something that many people do, and if you don't know what this word means, I'll explain it. Pandering is when you are over-agreeable and disingenuous on outreach for the sake of being listened to and engaged with. When you prioritize being liked by the other person, you will do this. You will start pandering. Pandering will cause non-vegans to lose respect for you as an activist, and you will lose control of the conversation. If you want to have an effective outreach interaction with non-vegans, you need to be able to control the conversation. Otherwise, they'll control it for you. Non-vegans will manipulate you into thinking that they've gained respect for you. And they will also pander to you. But when you pander, they'll manipulate you into thinking that they've gained respect for you by saying a couple of compassionate comments towards animals, or they'll say, yes, oh, that's an interesting point, even though they're not going to do anything about it. And the reason why they do this manipulation is because they're glad that you are not holding them accountable in that interaction. They know that on the other end of facing this is an ugly truth that they have to be responsible for. Again, back to the affection that we need to have or don't need to have towards animals. This is not about love and compassion. These words are used very often in the animal rights movement. Love animals, don't eat them, friends not food, all these kinds of things are actually a distortion of what this is about. Veganism is only about justice. Your likability does not determine your rights. Whether someone likes you or hates you doesn't determine your rights. Outreach is not about how you or anyone else feels about animals. It's about how they feel about injustice that they're responsible for. If you don't go around beating children, you aren't instantly a compassionate individual. If you walk out onto the streets and you see a cat or a dog and you don't kick them, does that make you compassionate? Isn't that just what a sane and rational person would do? They would not do that. Is that really our measurement for compassion? Not stabbing animals to death? This approach that we're teaching you, which is really just based on principles, is pure honesty. Telling someone the truth and holding them accountable is actually the most loving and respectful thing that you can do for them. Now, sure, we get people who say, the way you're talking is a little bit too confrontational, it's too harsh, it's rude. Maybe some of you think the same. But it's funny how when people go vegan as a result of these interactions, they thank you. Isn't it funny how that works? So it's always about perspective and who you're talking to. When you are simply holding them accountable, we're not being rude. We are not teaching you to be assholes to people when you talk to them. We're teaching you to be respectful to the victims and also giving non-vegans a chance to come out of their oppression that they're responsible for by speaking to them in a direct way. So this approach is respectful to the victims and also respectful to the victimizers. But it's also firm, respectful but firm. When you are being disingenuous, non-vegans can see that you desire to be validated by them and that desire is stronger than your desire to defend animals, therefore making a mockery of animal rights. So what are you really focusing on? Be mindful. Are you focusing on being liked by the person that you're speaking with as a priority? Are you trying to not upset them and make them angry as a priority? Or are you focusing on telling them the truth and speaking up for the victims? You may be hesitant to speak boldly whenever you are afraid to speak up for animals directly, or if bystanders call you too extreme, place yourself in the victim's position and analyze your approach from their perspective. Recently, I was in Cologne, Germany. We had a big event called the Cathedral of Truth. We had about 80 activists present. Fantastic action, very successful. I remember I was doing outreach and I approached a couple and they said, "We just spoke with someone else from your team. And the way they spoke to us was really rude, like really extreme." They even used that word, extreme. And I said, "Oh, right. Well, what did they say?" And they said, "Well, they kept saying that we were responsible for what was showing on the screens. And we're not doing this to them." Isn't that amazing that people feel entitled to such a degree that they think that they shouldn't be told that they're responsible for animals being violated in the worst possible ways in order for their hamburgers and their Sunday roasts? Just simply telling them the truth was what they were referring to as being too rude and extreme. Needless to say, my interaction with them went nowhere because clearly they weren't reachable. But again, this is a matter of perspective. Are you speaking up for the victims? Are you speaking from their perspective? Or are you prioritizing the oppressors? Would you consider a respectful yet direct conversation too extreme if you were locked in a slaughterhouse about to be killed? Speaking boldly is the most effective approach. When you don't speak boldly, it's implied that veganism doesn't need to be taken very seriously. You have to leave people feeling motivated. They need to feel like there is no other option for them other than going vegan. You cannot instill a motive in someone to change unless they feel bothered by, especially when it comes to an injustice that they're responsible for, they need to feel bothered by what it is that they're responsible for. You cannot instill that motive in them unless they feel guilty. Before we talk about this, I'd like to play that, no, we'll keep going. All right, so another thing that we need to clarify is beyond the health point that I've already made. This is not about health. This is not about human rights. This is also not about the environment. A lot of vegans talk about environmentalism when they talk about animal rights. The animal rights violations are the only thing that is completely unjustifiable and should be the only thing that you focus on during animal rights outreach. You can justify a life that isn't completely minimalist, as in terms of environmentalism. But what you cannot justify is being responsible for the animal rights violations when you are not vegan. Non-vegans may seem to be responsible to the health and environmental message, and that is likely because they're trying to deflect from the obvious and avoid being accountable for the murdered elephant in the room. We don't even know if environmental and health stats are correct, and there's no way that we can measure them accurately. You're not here as environmentalists if you're at a cube of truth. You may be an environmentalist, you may be an environmental scientist, but most of you are not. And even if you are, when you're at a cube of truth, you're not there to have a conversation about environmentalism unless you're only talking about the wild animals that are being affected. Because otherwise you're not speaking up for animals, are you? If you're just talking about soil erosion, ocean dead zones, pollution in the air, etc., you're not actually speaking up for animals. You're only speaking up about the environment, and most people are only going to care about that as far as it affects humans, which means you're promoting human supremacism even further. Even if you happen to speak to an environmentalist yourself, they will likely feel like they're already doing enough, just like vegetarians normally feel. If you ever feel compelled to focus on environment or health when speaking up for the animals, think about why oppression should end from the victim's perspective. Do you think that it's appropriate to say, this cow on the screen matters because of climate change? If you were in the victim's position, do you think it's appropriate for someone to say, your life matters and you should not be tortured and killed because of the environmental footprint that it causes? Then don't do that for non-human animals who are being oppressed at the hands of humans, the humans that you're speaking with. How to respond to health questions. When someone has a genuine question about health, and it's important to assess whether the question is genuine or not, because most people will bring up health excuses and say, well, it's hard to be vegan, I need meat for protein, I need to eat meat for iron, you need to get calcium from, whatever it is. Usually it's an excuse. But if they are genuinely asking about the health points, only entertain these arguments in that case if they bring them up. So don't start opening up the health points. Don't start talking about how healthy it is or how you can easily do this from a health point of view, because most people already know that vegans exist, therefore it's possible. And they know this. So you don't need to get into it unless they bring it up. And again, it has to be a genuine concern. If they bring up the health concern and it's genuine, you can say something like, the science is on our side when it comes to plant-based diets and them being healthy, and there are plenty of vegan athletes and bodybuilders out there. That's all you need to say. Some of you might say, well, what if people don't care about the ethics? What if people don't care about animal rights? Then is it okay to talk about the health and perhaps the environment points? Does the end justify the means? That kind of thing. We need to be speaking up for animals correctly. Too many vegans focus on things like plant-based recipes, restaurants, weight loss, or deforestation. Using phrases like friends not food or animal lovers don't eat animals further confuses non-vegans about what veganism is about. This is not a conversation about sympathy. This is a conversation about accountability. I just want to touch on whether it's actually effective to get people to go vegan based on the health and environment points if you think they don't care about animal rights. So then you go, okay, well, you don't need to care about animal rights then. Okay, let's talk about health and environment then. If you do happen to convince them, which by the way, I doubt heavily that you're actually going to convince them to be vegan. If you convince them though to be plant-based, because obviously they would not be vegan if they were convinced, what makes you think that that person is going to be not only vegan, like I said, they're not going to be vegan anyway, but also what kind of an example do you think that they're going to set for others? Because these are the kinds of people that are the perfect candidates for people who come out later on with a video on YouTube saying, here's why veganism didn't work for me. And it's because the entire time they were just focusing on their health. They weren't even vegan to begin with. They were plant-based. This further confuses the message. And it's our job to be responsible for what we say, how we say it, who we say it to, and how long we say it. If we control those things, we are being successful. Next slide. When it comes to comparing to an injustice, in order to make the point, if somebody says, well, maybe we should focus on humane killing instead of getting rid of these industries altogether, so welfareism instead of abolitionism. The most effective comparison to make is to place the person that you're speaking with in the victim's position. So sure, you can say, well, in the case of human slavery, would your argument hold? But it's actually more effective to just simply say, what if we're talking about you being the victim? Would you find it appropriate for that argument that you just used to be a justification for continuing to enslave, torture, and murder you? Please, and I'm really begging you, please do not use dog comparisons. This goes back to not leading with compassion. It's not about the love that people feel towards animals. It's about the hate that they feel towards injustice. When you say, would you be okay with this being done to a dog? First of all, you're making an assumption that that person you're speaking with has compassion for dogs. That may not be the case. Also, what makes you think that we live in a society that truly respects dogs? I know that they get more respect than cows and pigs and chickens and turkeys and fish, but that doesn't mean they get respected in the way that we want them to be respected, because, and as an example, we have shelters that kill dogs by the thousand. We have breeders that continue to breed dogs into existence. These two things would not exist in a society of humans who truly respect dogs. When we have so many dogs that need to be adopted, and when it's totally legal to just kill dogs in these shelters all around the world, we do not truly live in a society that respects dogs. So comparing to dogs is usually going to blow up in your face. And I've had that happen to me countless times. It doesn't come down to whether you can imagine your dog in a slaughterhouse. It comes down to whether you can imagine yourself in a slaughterhouse. When it comes to information, again, did you know? Did you know? Outside of what is asked of you. So unless someone asks you a question about stats or information specific to this topic, state minimal information during outreach conversations. We are not on the streets to verbally leaflet. You aren't at a cube of truth to be a statistician. You're there to have a concise conversation that holds people to account for their oppression towards non-human animals. A conversation will go on for longer than necessary if it turns into an argument about statistics. And if you start talking about statistics and you start going on and on about information, you will open it up for debates. You will get lost in debates. Oh, but I read this scientific paper that said this, and now you're taking your phones out and going on Google, and this is a waste of time. A conversation will go on for longer than necessary if it turns into an argument, and this is another reason why you shouldn't bring up the health and the environment points. They're usually the ones that lead into these kinds of discussions. Not everybody is on the streets to be reached. Sometimes they stop, they're a little bit curious, they look at the screens, but they're not there to be reached. They're not reachable. Again, you need to be responsible for who you're talking to. Part of your role is to assess who is reachable and who is not. Many people are not reachable. Accept that. You know, it's important that we engage with as many people as possible. That's part of your job, to make sure we're always paying attention when you're doing outreach to see who's available to be spoken to and engaging with them as fast as possible. But it's also part of your job to end the conversation as soon as you realize that they're not reachable, and we'll get into how you can assess that a bit better. If they want to have a short conversation with you, keep it short with them. Don't entertain bystanders who want to engage in long argumentative debates. It only makes the topic more obscure and distorts how simple this is. Do not underestimate the cunningness of non-vegans, which is fueled by their guilt. Many non-vegans will become really defensive and really cunning in the way that they talk to you. So again, you have to make sure that you are controlling the conversation. And also, don't underestimate the ability that many non-vegans will have to waste your vital time at work for the animals. Can you just raise your hands if you do not know what the Socratic method is? Raise your hand if you don't know what the Socratic method is. Okay. Not many. Okay, there's a few of you. All right. So the Socratic method was created by Socrates. This is actually to do with debates. Now, basically what the Socratic method is a method that brings into action, questioning instead of making statements. But again, this is only when you are getting into a back and forth debate. Socratic questioning is not an approach in and of itself. It is a communication tool that we use within our approach, where we ask questions that lead the bystander to their own conclusions. So an example of this might be, animal abuse is wrong. Statement. Do you think that animal abuse is wrong? Okay, during the outreach interactions, we want to focus on why way more than how. I would say 90% of your interaction should be focused on why someone should be vegan and why they should be an animal rights activist, as opposed to how, and how easy it is, how to get your nutrients, etc. People already know how to go vegan. We live in an age where you can use your smartphone to get anything that you need. All the information is at your disposal. Stop acting like it's very hard to be vegan. It's extremely easy, and people already know this. With the constant availability of Google and the internet, anybody can figure this out, and they can figure it out instantly. In order for people to feel the need to become vegan, they need to be held accountable for why they should be doing it. Focusing on the how is an insult to the victims, and it marginalizes the severity of what the victims are going through. Again, if you're in a slaughterhouse, if you're the one being oppressed, would you want people to focus on how easy it is to stop oppressing you, or would you want them to focus on why they should stop oppressing you? It's about how appropriate it is for us to be talking about this and how effective it is. Vegetarianism. Vegetarians are non-vegans, which means they are our target audience. Many people will say to us, I'm vegetarian, don't worry, I'm on your side. You don't need to talk to me, I'm vegetarian. How many times have you heard this? Yeah. This means not only are they our target audience, we should actually be speaking to them with more vigor, because they feel entitled. They think that they don't need to be spoken to about this. They think they're already doing enough. And you know what's crazy is that a lot of the times they'll say this while dairy footage is playing or egg footage is playing, which they're directly responsible for. They'll say, but I'm not responsible for this, even though they directly are. Therefore, you need to be speaking to them in a way that holds them to account, even more so, with more vigor than you would with anyone else. Now, I'm not saying this usually applies to vegetarians in most cases, but in some cases they just need a little bit of a push and they didn't know better. And some vegetarians will find it very easy to make that that connection, but I can tell you now that most of them feel entitled and they'll act disgusting when it comes to this topic. I feel like we missed a slide about sales and politics. No? Really? Can you just go back to that? Yeah, that's the one. I don't remember that being there. Can you just open it? Okay, so back to this slide. I just want to bring this back to your attention because a lot of people do use sales games and political games to get people, to listen. And again, you may have people acting in a way that is agreeable. They'll nod their heads, they'll say a couple of compassionate comments. You may think that they're getting the point. But when you use political games and sales games, you're actually taking the approach that you can trick them into being vegan. And now I'm going to share with you some wisdom that was passed down to us from the OG Gary Yourofsky, who, if you don't know who he is, he basically laid out the foundation for the animal rights movement that we as we know it today. A lot of the activists that you see today that are really influential would not really be around if it wasn't for this man. I wouldn't be doing this work if it wasn't for this guy. I wouldn't have gone vegan, and I definitely wouldn't have become an animal rights activist, at least not to the level that I am right now. So now I'm going to play this video for you, which, by the way, was recorded in Italy. And this message that he has to share is just as true as it was then as it is now. There are certain things that are just simply true, objectively. We have to not only take what he has to say here in this video with a grain of salt, we have to take it with a mountain of salt, because his experience is extremely vast. He's done more outreach to non-vegans than anybody in this entire movement. So please listen to what he has to say, because a lot of what I've just presented to you stems from the original teachings that has been passed down to us from this guy.
Always speak truthfully and forcefully. Do not be a politician ever. Playing politics doesn't work. If you think that if you're going to say plant-based instead of vegan, that's going to make somebody listen, you're sorely mistaken. If you think that by saying, I'm an animal advocate instead of an animal liberation activist, that someone's going to listen, it is completely untrue. After talking to 60,000 people, I've realized and learned that people are ready to listen to the message or they're not, no matter how you act. I can be as sweet as Gandhi or as radical as early Malcolm X, and it will not change one person's mind about the issue of veganism and animal rights. It all depends upon the person, whether they're willing to listen. I'll give you an example. A couple times a year, I have speeches that turn into a Jerry Springer show. People want to scream and yell at me. I don't want to do it, but they want to start. So recently, one of these lectures happened, and the student told me that I was rude and abrasive. I said, okay. Do you think everybody feels that way? And they said yes. I said, well, we're going to take a vote on that. There were about 40 students in the class. I said, raise your hand if you thought I was rude and abrasive. 7 people raised their hands. So I said, okay, that leaves 33 people that didn't think I was rude and abrasive and listened to what I had to say. So I pointed to the student and I said, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is you. And you, and I pointed to the 7 people. If I'm giving the same speech to the same crowd and 33 people like it and 7 people didn't, I can't be the problem. So again, what I'm saying is those 7 people came into that classroom unwilling to listen, no matter what I did, no matter what I said. In fact, there have been some lectures where I've gotten on my hands and knees and begged people to stop killing animals. My wife Erica witnessed one of these lectures at University of Central Florida. This guy was being rude and abrasive himself, and mean and stubborn and stupid. So I got on my knees sincerely and I said, please, please stop killing the animals. And if you're not going to stop killing them for the animals, stop doing it for me, your fellow human. Look what it's doing to me. And he looked at me dead in the eye and said, no. So my point is, politics never works. It's always better to speak the truth and be honest. And when I condemn politics and politicians, think about this. All the people that we collectively admire, Gandhi and Dr. King and Malcolm X and Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Henry David Thoreau, none of the people that we collectively admire was a politician. They were all activists. So I will ask activists to stop playing political games, say what needs to be said, explain the murder, the Holocaust that's taking place, explain the rapes that happen to animals on a daily basis. Don't be afraid to say these words. These animals are suffering horribly, and when we sit around and play political games, it doesn't benefit them in one bit.
Where did Asal go? Okay. So now I'm going to all right. Okay, so okay, cool. So we're going to show you an outreach example of how you should be doing this. Would you guys like to see that? Okay, great. So what we'll do before that, however, we'll show that at the end. What we'll do now is Asal will now present. So Asal will take over for now.
Buongiorno. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really, really happy to be here. I'm so looking forward to doing a cube here in Italy. As Paul mentioned, we have about 400 chapters at the moment, just under. And Sylvia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have about 60 chapters in Italy, in your region. 68 of the 300-something chapters are in Italy. So you guys should be proud, really proud. Our Italy team is definitely one of our strongest, most solid teams, and every time we want to make an example of a region that is thriving and is growing, we make an example of Italy. Some of you may know the story, but when Sylvia became our regional organizer for Italy, she basically started to build the team back up from the ground. So shout out to Sylvia for doing an amazing job. She's really like the godmother, I feel. I have so much respect for you, Sylvia. And I know you are not feeling the best, so thank you so much for organizing everything and for being here. And thank you all for being here. So what Paul just presented is our Holding Non-Vegans Accountable outreach workshop that we've been doing for the last few years, and we've been perfecting it. Every time we do it, there's an upgrade, an update. So everything that Paul covered is what we expect from you when you're at a cube. So from everything he described about the cube, when an activist standing in the cube, acting as a cuber, as well as when doing outreach. So everything that was covered just before is what we actually need you to be following, all the guidelines. What I am about to cover now is something that we have recently added to our workshop, which is now a masterclass. And this is not something that we necessarily expect everyone to follow. This is like an add-on to everything that you have learned so far about outreach. And what I'm about to cover will take your outreach to the next level. So it's an addition to what you know already. And we'll go into the details of an outreach conversation and your body language, etc. But I don't want you to get too nervous about this, because for a lot of you, this might be new information that you have never seen before, you've never heard before. So I don't want you to get too stressed about having to follow every single thing. Everything up until now, we need you to follow. But from this point on, just take it in, let it sink in, think about it, and try to incorporate it into your outreach and into your activism as much as you can. So the first thing I want to cover, this doesn't look good on the screen. It's actually cut off. No, it's actually cut off on the side as well. Yeah, perfect. So the first thing is our body language. Paul was talking about, when you're doing outreach, we have certain guidelines. There are certain things that we pay attention to. And for example, we approach people, once they're engaged with the footage. We don't approach them too soon, before they have connected with the footage. And also, we don't leave it too long, because if we approach them too late, they might already start walking away. So we approach them at the right time. But then there are other things that could take our outreach to the next level, so we can better understand the bystanders, because people are all different. They all communicate differently. They all have different styles of communication. They all have different personality types. They're all from different backgrounds, different age groups we're going to be talking to. So it's all going to be a little bit different. Now, the most important thing is that we want to interact with the public like a normal human being. We don't want you to think about this like this is going to be a very specific sort of a conversation where you're going to be acting, in a special way. No, we're all human beings. We're normal humans. Just like you may go to the supermarket and have a conversation with random people, you're being yourself. That's what we want you to do. Just be yourself. Be a human. Interact with the public like a normal human being. But then pay attention to the person that you're talking to, because then you can tailor your conversation to suit that individual. Now, what I'm talking about is that person's age, for example. Are you talking to a child? Are you talking to someone your own age? Are you talking to a teenager? Are you talking to a much older person? Are you talking to someone from a different cultural background? Is there a language barrier? All of these things are important, because then you can navigate through that conversation a bit better if you already have these tools. So people have different personalities. Sometimes people are more talkative and outgoing, so they're actually more than happy to talk to a total stranger on the street about any topic. Other people might be a little bit shy. They may not feel comfortable talking to a stranger, especially when it comes to a topic that is so uncomfortable like what we talk about. So just be mindful of that, because when you're talking to someone and doing outreach, their body language, their eye movement, and how they interact with you can tell you a little bit about their personality. So if someone's just standing there and they're not engaging with you really, and they're just like nodding, or they're just agreeing, but they're looking around, they look nervous or shy, it could be a sign that they're not really taking in the information. So it's like talking to a wall and you're basically wasting your time. If you're not getting any feedback, whatever kind of feedback it might be, positive or negative, but if you're not getting any feedback, then that's a sign that you're probably wasting your time, and you should cut that conversation short and go and spend your time, which is very valuable, with someone who is going to be more receptive or more open to it. So you do want the bystander to be engaged with you. Even if they're not saying much, you want their body language to show you that they are, engaged in the conversation. The next thing might be language barrier. So you might be like, in Italy here, when I do outreach, I might be talking to Italian people who do not speak any English, and obviously I don't speak any Italian. So if that happens, I'm not going to try to make it work. I will actually come and find one of you guys so that you can do the outreach. And I will go and talk to someone who can speak English so that I can have a more productive conversation. Because sometimes I think what happens is activists are too eager to do outreach, and they want to use just any opportunity. But we need to be smart with our time. Like I said, our time is very valuable. We usually have a limited time, 3-4 hours at a cube. So you don't want to just try to talk to just anybody because they have stopped. We have to be smart with picking who we talk to. And the next thing is age. Should we talk to kids? Yes, absolutely, we should talk to kids. Sometimes activists think that we shouldn't talk to kids, especially if they're very young, because it's inappropriate, they may be scared, they may not understand it. But we actually believe that we should definitely talk to kids, and one big reason is that children have not had the amount of conditioning that adults have had. We all go through, school, and in our families, we are conditioned within the society through social media. And so when we become adults, we have been conditioned so much. We have all these different layers of conditioning. That's why when we talk to people on the street, they have so much defense, and they get so defensive, and they have all these arguments and excuses. But when you talk to children, they don't have any of those because they haven't gone through the programming just yet. So they are actually going to be a lot more receptive. And has anyone had outreach experience with talking to kids, and it was easier, and they got it, and they didn't have any arguments? It's usually like that, because they're like, of course, yes, no, we shouldn't be doing this to kids. I want to be vegan. So we should definitely talk to kids, and we shouldn't shy away from that. This is such a cool photo, in my opinion, because the sister is covering the eyes, and then the mom is covering the other girl's eyes. So it's a very powerful image, and it says a lot about the state of our society and how people see animal abuse, and then our work as activists, which is all we're doing is showing them the truth, but then the conditioning says, no, we don't want to look at the truth. So yes, we definitely talk to kids, but then it's important how you talk to them. As Paul showed a photo that showed, the activists going down on their knees when they're talking to kids. I do that myself all the time. If you're talking to a small child, that's a good way of doing it. Just go down so that you're physically on their level, but then also with your language and the words that you choose, you want to speak to them and get on their levels. You don't want to say something like, so do you understand that you're being a hypocrite? If you said, that doesn't work with a child. So you have to talk to them in their own language. And then the last thing here is body language, obviously. So when you're talking to a bystander, you don't want to be too close to them. You also don't want to be too far away from them so that they can't hear you and you can't hear them. So close enough, you want to be standing to them close enough. It's important how you stand, because certain positions or postures can tell the other person whether you're nervous, whether you're confident. For example, if you're slouching, that's not a good sign because that means that you're not confident in what you're doing. So try to have a nice strong posture with your legs strong on the earth, and don't have your hands in your pocket like this, slouching and looking too casual, because this is important. This is serious what we're doing, and you want the person to take you seriously. So what you want them to take from your body language is someone who is very confident in what they're doing. They're sure of what they're doing. They believe in what they're doing, and that they're comfortable. So you want to have a nice strong posture, and then don't use your hands too much. You can use your hand as I'm doing, just like I said, like a normal human being. And I know Italians are famous for using their hands, so that's fine. But one thing, for example, you don't want to do is point your finger at the person when you're talking to them. That's not really a good thing to do. Eye contact is also important. So I'll give you one really good tip about eye contact. This is something you can use for your day-to-day life as well. When you're talking to someone, you want to have eye contact with them when they are speaking to you. So if someone's talking to me, I'm going to have eye contact with them, because that means that I'm listening to them and I'm paying attention. So I'm present in the conversation. But then when I'm talking myself, it's okay to look around casually and then come back. So for example, if this was the screen and I was outreaching someone, I could be talking to them, pointing at the screen, looking around a little bit, making sure everything is running smoothly at the cube, and then having eye contact. But then when they are talking to me, I'm going to be paying attention to them. So that's one good tip that you can use. So we have a flow chart. I don't think we showed that just yet, but we can put it on the screen at the end. And is there anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about when I say the flow chart? Put your hand up if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's basically the steps that we have in the outreach conversation. So most of you have seen it, but we will put it up, and then you can obviously have a copy. You can ask your organizers to send you a copy online, so you have it on your phone and you can have a look at it. That basically tells you the first step of the conversation as soon as you say hello to someone until the end when you close the conversation. So when I say the flow chart, that's what I'm referring to. We do have the flow chart. We have the different steps that you follow within an outreach conversation. However, as much as we want you to follow those steps, we want you to, like I said, be a normal human being. We don't want you to sound like a robot. Sometimes when I am at a cube and I'm listening to the outreach conversations, I feel like the outreacher is just eager to say all those things on the flowchart, regardless of what that actual conversation is. So sometimes you have to use your best judgment, switch the steps maybe, say number 3 before number 2 as an example, or say it differently, or add something in, or get rid of one of the steps. So just use your best judgment and don't think that you have to memorize it and repeat it every single time the same way. So you want to read the room and pay attention to the nuances, because every conversation can be a little bit different. And again, don't sound like a robot. For example, the first question we ask is, how does this footage make you feel? But then there are other ways of asking this question. And sometimes you actually don't need to ask the question, because as soon as you approach the person, they might be crying, they might be shocked, and they might start the conversation by saying, "This is so bad," or "This makes me angry." So if someone said, "This makes me angry," it doesn't make sense to say, "How does this footage make you feel?" Because then I'm going to be sounding like a robot, because I'm not paying attention to what they said. That's what I mean when I say don't sound like a robot. So pay attention to what that person is saying or doing, and then you can say, how does this footage make you feel? Or you can just make a statement. You can say, this is what we're showing. We're showing the behind the scenes of the industries that abuse animals. You can say, are you against animal abuse? So sometimes you can go into the conversation and start it a little bit differently. All I'm saying is use your best judgment, have the flowchart in the back of your mind, but it's okay to bring your own uniqueness to the conversation and change it up a little bit. Body language. So we did talk about body language a little bit, and I covered some of these. But basically, you want to be mindful of the person that you're talking to and their body language. If their body language can tell you a lot about whether they are open, as in open-minded and open to the conversation, if they're closed off, if they are engaged with you, like I said, if they're just nodding or looking around and they're not really engaged. A good sign of someone who's engaged is if they have eye contact, if they ask questions, if they make comments. Even their facial expression can tell you if they're absorbing the information. And then a good example of someone who is not engaged or not interested is someone who is like, yep, And then usually at the end, they're like, oh, sorry, my train is leaving. So before they say that, you can cut the conversation short and you can end the conversation. So don't wait for them to cut it short. Don't wait for them to end it. If someone is not giving you a sign, a clear sign that they're interested, they're open, and they're engaged, just say goodbye to them. This is a really good example of an outreacher's posture. As you can see, Paul's standing there with his hands behind his back. That's a good posture because when we stand like this, that means that we're open. That shows that we're open to have a conversation. Because we also, as outreachers, we want to be approachable as well. We want the bystanders to approach us and feel comfortable talking to us. So if I'm standing like this, and even I sometimes do it without realizing, but then I pull myself up on it. But if you're standing like this, that's not very approachable with your arms crossed, for example. If your hands are in your pocket, it can look a little bit slouchy and too relaxed. But if you're standing waiting for the conversation to happen, and you're standing like this with a nice strong posture, that's the best thing. So your arm positioning, your posture, your hand movement, and your eye contact, these are all the things that you can take into account when you're having an outreach conversation. Okay, now we're going to cover some do's and don'ts in outreach. Paul covered this really well. So we don't want to be doing verbal leafleting. That's not what we do. We don't want to bombard people with too much information, too many scientific facts, data, numbers, and things like that, especially about, medical or nutritional information, environmental stats. It just goes over the person's head because usually it's too much for them. If you say, did you know that blah, 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 and, just give them so many numbers about environment or health studies, it just goes over their head. And also it can create unnecessary debate and dialogue because then they'll be like, oh, actually, that's not true because I read on this paper that it's this number or it's the other way around. So we don't want to be having those kind of debates. We don't want to be having any kind of debates at the Cube, but especially about nutrition or diet or health or environment or anything like that. What we want to do is have a conversation and hold the person, that individual, accountable. That's all we want to focus on. So we don't want to be the ones starting debates or dialogues about anything other than animal rights. A really good outreach, a productive outreach conversation is a good balance between lecturing, asking questions, and silence. So, like Paul said, we don't want to be giving them too much information, so not too much lecturing, more so questioning, not questioning, but asking questions, so that we help the person get to their own conclusions, and we help them, we guide them through that conversation, but you want to have a good balance. So sometimes it's important for you to give them information. So a conversation shouldn't just be asking questions, and not giving them information. You should be asking questions, giving them information, and then silence, because when you give them the information, you want there to be silence. Or when they're watching the footage, you want there to be silence so that they're actually absorbing it all in. You want to wait and let it sink in so that they can process it and digest it. And then they will come back with maybe more questions, more arguments, and then you can continue with the conversation. So always remember, a good, productive conversation, outreach conversation, has all these 3 elements in it. Asking questions, lecturing, or giving information, and silence. You don't want to be talking the whole time. You want to allow the person to also talk, to also ask questions, and you do want them to feel like you're listening to them. You don't want them to feel like you're just there to cover these points that you have, and if they ask any nuanced questions, you're not wanting to answer that or cover their concerns. You want them to also feel heard. So another thing we don't want you to be doing is to say you're supporting this, showing, pointing at the footage, you're supporting this or you're contributing to this. What we want you to say when you're pointing at the footage or you're talking about what's happening to the animals is that you tell that person that they are demanding this, what's happening, or that they are responsible for it. Because when you say you're supporting it, that's more of a passive thing to do. So other people are doing it and then this person is just supporting it. No, it's not like that. That person is actually one reason why the animals are going through hell every day. So they are part of the problem. They are a part of that big problem that we're trying to solve. So they are responsible for it and they are demanding it. So I really hope that today, if you're going to take one thing, if you're not already doing it, it's going to be this slide. And I hope that if I'm listening to conversations, I'm not going to be hearing, you're supporting it. But instead say, this is what you're demanding. You are responsible for it. Can you see how different that hits? It's a lot more powerful when you say it like that. Another thing that we need to clarify is vegan versus plant-based diet. So as you all know, veganism is way more than just a diet, although most of the animals that are being exploited, abused, tortured, tormented, and murdered are going through this because of diet or because of food. However, it doesn't end there. There are other industries that do this to the animals. So we want to clarify this for people because as animal rights activists, it is a part of our job to correct the confusion within our society, and we want to correct the language and address this problem. So we want to make sure that people do not refer to veganism as a diet or a lifestyle anymore. And we can do that in our outreach conversations. So a plant-based diet is something that anyone can do for any reason, health, environment, animals, whatever they want to tell themselves. They basically just eat plants. And if someone is on a plant-based diet, they're most likely going to have a little bit of honey, they're going to have collagen, they're going to have maybe fish sometimes. So that's a plant-based diet. That's not what we're talking about. We don't care about that. And veganism is not a diet. Do we all agree that veganism is not a diet? And also, veganism is not a lifestyle. It's not like, oh yeah, I have a smoothie bowl and I ride my bike every day. That's a lifestyle. I do Pilates. That's a lifestyle. Veganism is not a lifestyle. Do we all agree? If you're against child abuse, is that a lifestyle? No. So this is a position that we're taking against animal abuse, animal injustices. So it doesn't make it a diet or a lifestyle, and it is part of our job, like I said, to clarify this for people, for non-vegans. Veganism applies to many aspects of our life, so it's not just the diet. It applies to our clothing, to our makeup, to our skincare, to the cleaning products we use, places we go to, and many other things. For example, someone could be eating a plant-based diet while wearing animal skin and using products that are tested on animals. Why? Because they are doing it for their health. So someone, like I said, could be on a plant-based diet, but they could be wearing animal skin, and that doesn't make them vegan. So it's okay to say vegan diet. We just need to make sure that people understand that veganism is not actually a diet. Does that make sense? So, because sometimes we have to be realistic. We do live in a non-vegan world, and sometimes you may have to say a vegan diet, or you may go somewhere and they ask you, are you vegan? And they're only referring to your diet, or you're buying a product, a food item, and it's vegan. So that refers to the diet. So it's okay to say it. It's just about how you say it and making sure you clarify it, especially when you're doing outreach. Another really important thing is not using it when we're referring to the animals. I hear this all the time. I recognized this early on after going vegan, so I'm really mindful of that. I've stopped doing it myself, and I hear it from activists still, every now and then. So when we refer to the animals as it or thing, we're actually going with the common narrative, which is animals are just here for us to use them. They're just basically objects, they're things. We are talking about individual beings who are sentient. So we do not refer to them as it. We may not know the sex of a particular animal. It's okay. We don't have to guess if they're a she or a he. We can just refer to them as they, because that's what we do with sentient beings like humans, like individuals, right? So we are responsible for correcting the language and culture when it comes to the way humans view animals, and this is one big thing. When you talk to non-vegans, 99.9% of them refer to the animals as it. Any animals, even their pets. So that's non-vegan language. We don't want to be using non-vegan language when we're talking about the animals. This may or may not apply to outreach or when we're at the Cube, but it's good information for some of you. Some of you probably already know, but I hear this quite often, so I thought it would be good to put it in. So vegan versus cruelty-free. What's the difference? Well, if something is vegan, it is by default cruelty-free, because vegan means, one, it doesn't have any ingredient that came from an animal, and two, it was not tested on animals. So when you buy a product and it says cruelty-free, it's not necessarily vegan because it might have animal-based ingredients. Cruelty-free just means it was not tested on animals. It's weird, but that's the law. But when something is vegan, we don't need to say it's vegan and cruelty-free, because veganism has cruelty-free in itself already. So vegan means it's already cruelty-free. But if it's cruelty-free, it may not be vegan. All right. The last two slides, I've called them cringe party, and you'll see why it's cringy. Actually, I think the next 3 slides. So these are some of the cringy things that you hear. Maybe not at the Cube, you see it online, maybe at other events. 1, the most cringy thing, friends not food. Paul touched on this. It's not about whether we like animals or we get along with them or not. It's about whether we respect their rights, their most basic rights to live without, being enslaved. So that doesn't make them our friends. So friends not food, very cringy. Animal lovers don't eat animals. Again, we don't have to love animals to leave them alone. We just have to respect their rights. So animal lovers, don't eat animals. Don't say that. Be kind, be vegan. Again, it's not about being kind necessarily. It's just about being sane. It's common sense that we leave them alone. It's common sense that we don't torture them. It's common sense that we don't stab them. Just like we don't do it to humans, to kids. It's common sense. It has nothing to do with our kindness, with our compassion, with how much we love them. Peace, love, veganism. I don't need to say anything about that. It's not about peace. It's not about love. It's not about kindness. It's only about respect. All right, another cringe party slide. So, I've heard this so many times. That photo is supposed to make someone feel yucky about what they're eating. Eggs are products of chicken menstruation. I hear this sometimes. People say, but did you know eggs are chicken periods? Now, I don't want to start a debate or dialogue here. I'll just put it out there because I know we're going to do a Q&A after this. But I want to just say that this is not put here so that we can start discussing whether this is true or not. From my research, and Paul has looked into it as well, chickens are not mammals, so they have different biology to us. Their bodies work differently. And eggs are not actually their periods. They're menstruation. But the point is, so it's factually wrong, but leaving that aside, the point is that we're not trying to get people to go vegan because something is gross. People already know that they're eating all kinds of insides and outsides of animal body parts. Every part of an animal is being processed and turned into sausages and processed meats. People already know this. So we're not trying to get someone to go vegan because it's gross and disgusting to eat something that came out of a chicken's asshole. What we're trying to get them to see is that the animals don't belong to us. We need to respect their most basic right and leave them the fuck alone. So, using examples like this is actually a health argument because it's actually unhealthy or gross or disgusting for our health, right? When you think about it, this is just a health argument. It has nothing to do with animal rights. And this one doesn't come up at the Cube. Well, I hope so. I've never heard of it. I hope I never do. But we see it a lot, and we see it more and more, I feel. These are some of the examples that I found online of messages about veganism that have a sexual tone. And I thought, this is really cringy. Not only cringy, but I thought this is really disrespectful to the animals. And I brought it to Paul, and we discussed it, and we both agreed. And I have done this masterclass twice before, and Paul has covered this, and we got really good feedback about this again, even though it doesn't directly affect the Cube. We got really good feedback, so I would like to hear your feedback after this as well. But we strongly believe that this kind of messaging is a disrespect to the animals and what they're going through. To basically minimize the animals and their rights and the whole animal rights movement down to Viagra and vanity. Because when we say vegans last longer, what are we trying to say? Or if people see messages like, we only fuck vegans, so what, the bystander is supposed to be like, oh, okay, so I'll go vegan just so I can fuck you. If we were talking about any human injustice, would we be using tactics like this? If we did, people would shame us, they would get angry at us, and they will not respect us or take us seriously. So why do we think it's okay to do this to the animals who are the most oppressed? Always taking away from the seriousness of the messaging. Always diluting the message. Always making it about the human somehow. Whether it's the environment we want to live in, it's our health, or our sexual health, or sexual life, or sexual experiences. We don't even want to get into whether this is true or not, but we just don't think this is respectful to the animals. Since when did it become about vegans being sexier? Like, how is that important, whether vegans are sexier or not? Are people supposed to be like, oh yeah, vegans have better sex and they look sexier, so that's a good reason to go vegan? It's only about bringing justice to the animals. Vegans are sexier doesn't give you a moral obligation. Nothing gives you a moral obligation other than focusing on the victims. When animal rights activists aren't respecting the animals, how can we expect non-vegans to respect the cause and take our work seriously? All we have tried to do with creating the cube and every little detail that goes into it, as Paul covered the cube, all the small things that goes into how we stand, all the details from the outreach, all the steps that we follow. Everything we have done is so that people, the public, non-vegans, take us more seriously, because vegans are looked at as doormats. Everyone can just step on them and walk all over them and mock them. When you watch movies, now they usually put a vegan in the movies or TV shows, and usually the vegan is always the weirdo, is the person that everyone laughs at, is mocking them, and they're just the weird one. And that's how they're conditioning the society. Vegans are looked at as some weird person who just loves animals and eats grass. All we want to do is make this movement so strong so that people have to respect us as animal rights activists and have to take us seriously so that they take the message seriously. So by doing things like this, photos like this, who can take this seriously? So again, this hopefully doesn't come up at a cube, but I just think this is good food for thought. You know, if you have never come across it, maybe you did have an opinion about this sort of messaging already, maybe you didn't, so you can have a think about it. But we definitely don't want to hear anything like this at the cube during outreach. And that's the last slide. So what we want to do now, we're going to go into Q&A, or should we play the outreach first? Yeah, so we're going to show you the flowchart. We're going to play an outreach conversation so that you can see an example of everything we talked about in action. And then we're going to do a quick Q&A. We were actually supposed to finish at 12:30, but I think we're going to need a little bit more time. So let's put the flowchart up. It's really... Okay, so this is the flowchart. This is all the steps that you need to take someone from being non-vegan to vegan. And you can do this within 5 minutes if you follow the steps and if you're talking to the right person. So when you approach someone, you ask them, hello, how does this footage make you feel? Like I said, we want to interact with people like a normal human being. We don't want to be a robot. So we say hello, just like we normally do. And then we pay attention to their body language, maybe facial expression, and then ask them, how does this footage make you feel? We have decided on this question because you're asking two things. You're first of all getting a sense of whether that person is engaged and they're watching the footage. And 2, you're touching on how it makes them feel, because when we're talking about an injustice comes from the heart. The arguments and the excuses come from the brain. When we do outreach, we don't want to get into people's brains too much, because that's what's been conditioned over the years. The heart can never be conditioned. So we want to connect to their hearts. Hopefully they're going to be open. And ask them, how does this footage make you feel? Now, if they are not open, they're not open-minded, they're not interested, you can repeat the question one more time. And then if they don't give you an answer, then you can disengage and walk away from them. But if they do show you a sign, then you can explain to them, we're showing behind the scenes of industries that abuse animals, such as the meat, dairy, and egg industries. And all the footage is standard practice and includes humane and RSPCA certified, etc. So this is the information you give them. Now, like I was saying before, you can change it up a little bit. It's okay to say it in your own words. Don't change the whole messaging, but it's okay to bring your uniqueness to it. Then, after giving them the information, they might say something themselves. They might show you, in their body language. They might be shocked. They might be sad. Then you ask them, is it safe to say that you're against animal abuse? Most people say yes. Has anyone ever talked to someone who said no? So it does happen. But most people say yes. And that's what we want to hear. So we go to the next one. Step 3. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while consuming animal products such as meat, dairy, fish, and eggs? And you point at the footage. So when you ask them, are you against animal abuse? And they say, yeah. Most people say, yes, of course. But they still don't get why you're asking or what animals you're referring to. So then you're basically catching them in their own hypocrisy. When you say, do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while eating these products? Because most likely that person is not going to be vegan. I mean, sometimes when I get to this point, the person says, no, I'm vegan. It's rare, but sometimes it happens. So usually they're not vegan. They could be a vegetarian, and at this point, maybe they get excited and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's why I'm a vegetarian. And then you're like, jackpot. So you ask them the question, do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while consuming animal products? Recently, so we did a cube in Amsterdam. We had the week of, one damn week for a whole week. And then I also did a cube in Paris. And what was really interesting to me was that so many people that I talked to said, yes, it is possible. So they thought it's possible to be against animal abuse while eating these products. And then obviously they would give me their logic. But it's interesting how you would think, no, how can someone say, yes, it's possible, but yeah, people will come up with their own reasoning. So at this point, they might be throwing any of these arguments or excuses at you, any sort of objection. We're not going to go through these ones, but they're the most common ones that you hear. Oh, but lions though, but protein, but we need to eat animals. We've been doing it for so long. All the arguments. So you can have a look at this, and we have some, responses to them, or you can come up with your own responses. At this point, you cover the excuse or argument. You answer it, you respond to it. They might have another one right after, and another one, and another one. Now, like I said, and Paul also covered this, we care about who we spend our vital time with. So if at any point you get a feeling that the person is just there to argue with you, they throw one argument at you, and they're not even waiting to hear the response, they're already thinking about the next argument, and they throw it at you, If they keep doing this, you need to cut that conversation short. You need to say something like, okay, I don't think this conversation is going anywhere. I feel like you're just arguing with me and you're not actually wanting to hear my responses, so have a good day and walk away from them. But if you feel like the arguments or the concerns or the excuses are genuine to that person, then sure, spend time covering those concerns and move on to the next ones. Can you go down? So these are all the arguments, religion, it's hard, it tastes good, all of those things that we don't need to cover now, but you can have a look at them later. And then after covering the arguments, the next question you ask, step number 4, is what do you feel is stopping you from not abusing animals anymore and going vegan today? So at this point, you're putting the issue on the table, you're not, being shy about the problem and the solution. You're also holding them accountable. You're asking them, are you going to go vegan today or not, basically? And if not, what's stopping you? Because if they genuinely see the problem and they are convinced that animal abuse is wrong, then they should want to do something about it. And they have the perfect opportunity because an expert can help them answer those concerns they might have. So you ask them this question, they give you their answer, and they might say, I don't think today, but maybe slowly, I'll definitely eat less animal products from today. They can say something like that. They can say something else. But usually most people at this point are not convinced yet. Number 5, do you know the number 1 benefit of veganism? And sometimes people say, yeah, I think it's healthier. Sometimes they say, I don't know. When they say, I don't know, I usually like to keep them more engaged. So I say, well, just have a guess. They 99% of the time don't get it right, but sometimes they do. So the answer you give them is, for the animals, they no longer have to be abused and killed needlessly for you. For you as an individual, you said that you're against animal abuse. When you become vegan, you will no longer be a hypocrite. Because when you say you're against animal abuse, yet you're demanding animal abuse, these two don't go together, so you are being a hypocrite. And you're pointing it out. So at this point, some people are like, wow, because you hit them with the truth, they really get it. Some people will get really offended. They will get defensive. They might even be like, okay, well, goodbye, because it's too uncomfortable. Or they might get a little bit angry at you. They might have more arguments. But at this point, you have made it super clear they are being a hypocrite. And then if they still have any resistance, you can say, if you were in their position, how urgently would you want this to end? Because a lot of people get it, but then, like I said, they say, well, I can't do it overnight. I need time. I think I have to do it slowly so that it's not hard on my body. So then you can say, if you were in their position, how urgently would you want this to end? And again, you only want to put that individual in the victim's position. Not their children, not their partner, not their dog, not somebody else, themselves. Because that's the most powerful thing to do. If the person's going to get it, they're only going to get it if they imagine themselves in the animal's position. And then the last step, after our conversation, are you going to stop abusing animals and go vegan? So one more time, you're giving them an opportunity to declare whether they are going vegan or not. And then you can leave them with this. Remember, this is not food for thought. This injustice is an urgent matter, and for as long as you take to go vegan, these animals are abused and killed because of you. Once you've gone vegan, please also speak up and defend animals. So it's important to make sure the person gets the fact that by going vegan, they're taking one step, but we need them to be active and speak up for the animals as well. So you're already starting to recruit them into activism as well. All right, I'm gonna pass it on to Paul. He'll cover this because I'm copying.
Once this is done, you can play the video. Okay. So to summarize this flowchart for you so that you can see this in your mind, and it is very simple for you to adopt and implement immediately when you go out there today, because this is very simple. We're only asking you to follow 7 steps. And to clarify, once again, this is not a script necessarily that we're asking you to follow. We don't want you to sound like robots. Every one of these steps is based on a principle. So this is more of a principle than it is an approach. Step number 1, hello, how does this footage make you feel? Again, you need to assess if the person already has said how they feel or not. Or if they don't even know what they're watching yet, then before you ask them how the footage makes them feel, say, would you like to know what this is? Or would you like to know why we're here? Then you would explain it. But then, in that case, you still have to ask them, how does this footage make you feel? Because we want to start from here. At one point or another, you will, at the beginning of this process, you'll explain what's happening on the screens. Step number 2, is it safe to say that you are against animal abuse? For those who say, no, I'm not against animal abuse, I can't really recall that many people that have ever said that to me, but if they do say that, that's a huge red flag. That's probably your sign to end the conversation. You can ask them again, is that how you really feel? You think that abusing animals is totally okay? And if they continue to answer that question by saying, yeah, I think it's fine, I'm not against animal abuse, what do you think is the point of talking to that person? So at that point, I would end the conversation. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while consuming animal products, such as meat, dairy, or eggs? This is usually where excuses come into play. But if you're talking to someone who's open-minded and willing and ready to change, they will just concede immediately and say, no, it's a contradiction, it's hypocrisy. And that's a really good thing, because that means you'll breeze through these 7 steps really easily, and you'll get to the end and that person will most likely become vegan immediately. This is a fantastic question because it will gauge how open that person is and how reachable they are. What do you feel is stopping you from not abusing animals anymore and going vegan today? This is also where some of the excuses might come up. Step number 5. Do you know the number 1 benefit of being vegan? Now, I just want to point out that most people will answer this question by saying it's healthier to be vegan, or it's better for the environment, which just proves that we don't need to spend our time educating non-vegans on how healthy it is to be vegan, or how much better it is for the environment. Our job is to be animal rights activists and speak up for the animals only. If you were in their position, how urgently would you want this to end? This question has the follow-up, and we covered that earlier, but the follow-up to that is pointing out that the number 1 benefit is that the animals are no longer tortured and abused because of you, the non-vegan that you're speaking to. And for you as an individual, you say that you're against animal abuse with your words. That means you'll no longer be a hypocrite in your actions. How urgently would you want this to end if you're in their position? Step number 7. So we're already at the end. This is very quick. This is very easy to follow. Step number 7, after our conversation, are you going to stop abusing animals and go vegan? You can leave them with this food. This here is not just food for thought, right? Remember, this is not just food for thought. This injustice is an urgent matter, and for as long as you take to go vegan, these animals will be abused and killed because of you. Once you've gone vegan, please also speak up and defend animals. If we are going to summarize this entire outreach protocol into 3 principles, it would be number 1, holding non-vegans accountable. If you're not doing that in the interaction, what are you doing? You're just giving them information. You're just giving them food for thought. Principle number 2, you need to be constantly putting the person that you're speaking with in the victim's position. You also need to be speaking yourself from the victim's position. Throughout the whole interaction, you will need to do this because non-vegans love to speak from the position of the victimizer. It's really easy to make excuses when you're speaking from the victimizer's position. And principle number 3 is asking them what they're going to do about this today, not eventually, not allowing them to just say, I'm going to think about this, or I'm going to try and do better, or I'm going to reduce. What are you going to do about this today? This is a call for action. We want you to take action immediately. They're the 3 principles. Some of the notes here, again, we covered this already, but it needs to be repeated, I think. You are in charge of the conversation. If you're not in charge of the conversation, the other person is. Don't entertain distractions, deflections, or irrelevant questions. So when we went through the circle of excuses, and people can bring up excuses throughout the interaction, just remember, we have something called the 3 strikes and you're out rule. Okay? So as a good gauge, if you respond to their excuse, oh, but plants have feelings too. And by the way, when people say stuff like this, don't pander. We've already covered not pandering. Don't say, oh, that's an interesting point. It's not an interesting point. If people say plants have feelings or whatever the argument is, respond to it. That's a ridiculous thing to say. You cannot compare killing plants to an animal. How would you feel if someone stabbed you in the throat and then compared that action to cutting some grass? Would you think that those 2 would be equal? If that doesn't address it for them and they're not satisfied with that response and they bring up another excuse, okay, we give them another chance. We respond to that excuse. And if they bring up a 3rd excuse and we respond to that and they're still not satisfied and they keep bringing up excuses, end the conversation. 3 strikes and you're out. We're not here to waste time with people. The best message you can send to someone who's not listening is to just end the conversation, trust me. And you don't have to say anything witty. You can just say, this is going nowhere, and walk off. You can just say bye and walk off. And the message that you're sending to non-vegans in that situation is, today, a vegan wasn't willing to put up with your bullshit. That is a much stronger message to send than trying to come up with the perfect rebuttal. I didn't finish that. And just the last one is to focus only on the animals, not the environment and not on the health. Always refocus and bring it back to the animals. Hold the individual accountable. Scroll up. Yeah, and be ready to end the conversation. If you judge it, they're not open. We just covered that. At the beginning of the conversation, let the people watch the footage a little bit at least, but start the interaction with them. But in the beginning of the conversation, let them watch a little bit, you know. When you explain what's happening, just pause for a moment. Let them absorb it, and then ask them, how does this make you feel? That's a really good way to approach the beginning part of the interaction. This is a huge problem that sometimes we see, if it doesn't happen often, but if it does happen, it's a huge problem. Do not interrupt other outreach interactions. So if you're doing outreach, it should be you speaking to whoever it is that you're speaking with, even if it's a group of people. So if it's you speaking to one or more people, there should not be another outreacher who comes in and tries to also speak to those people. Do not interrupt the interaction. It's rude and it's also unprofessional. Again, we're here for the animals. Please keep the socializing to after the cube. We have social activities that are organized as part of this action. So just keep that for that part of this action. Can you scroll down a bit? So this is just an image here for you to understand that non-vegans are experiencing cognitive dissonance. That's why they deserve a chance to be edified. They deserve a chance. But only so much of a chance, because most people will try to waste our time in the process. But what comes out of their mouths usually is excuses and deflections. And it's all kinds of ridiculous excuses. They're all absolutely ridiculous. PETA, as if that's a justification for not being vegan. Plants, though, it's systemic, though. Focus on the government. Focus on corporations, not me, the individual who's demanding it. How ridiculous is that? Oh, but that indigenous guy in Africa or Alaska, this is similar to what I was saying earlier about people who hide behind poor people and say, well, they can't do it. So yes, they can actually. In the Congo, we have a chapter. You can tell them that. As part of this organization, we have vegans in the Congo who are actually animal rights activists. Now what's your excuse? Religion, though. Abortion, though. Don't let people distract you with human rights arguments about abortion and anything else. And so your job is to refocus on individual accountability the whole time and focus on the real victims. Okay, so now we'll play an outreach example for you. And I just want to point out that Asal covered earlier that when you're speaking to kids, that you adjust the way you're speaking to them somewhat, right? But the principles are always the same. So your tone may change. The way that you speak needs to change a little bit, but you should be still covering all of these principles, and this is an example. What do you think?
It's cool. Yeah.
You think the footage is cool or we're cool?
Both.
What do you think is cool about the footage?
I think it's definitely moving.
Yeah?
It's definitely inspiring in a way.
Inspiring.
As in it would make me change. And I also like the way you're showing it, to the people holding it.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. And what about you? How does the footage make you feel?
It makes me feel bad.
It makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
Are you both against animal abuse?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And this is clearly animal abuse?
Clearly, yes.
These are the standard practices that are carried out in the meat, dairy, and egg industries. This is actually claimed by the industry themselves to be the best of the best in terms of their practices. What you're watching is farms and slaughterhouses that are labeled RSPCA approved and humane certified. Do you think this is humane?
No.
No. Do you think it's possible to be against animal abuse while eating meat, dairy, or eggs?
Yes.
How so?
I say it's possible to give the animals the best life you can before eating. For example, if you're gonna eat chickens, you wanna let them be free range. When I eat eggs, I have free range eggs because I'm 100 chickens per hectare. So yeah.
How old are you?
I'm 12.
Wow, you know a lot about this stuff for a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
Do you live out on a farm or somewhere out in the rural area?
Just live out in the suburbs.
So how do you know it's a 100 hectare ratio?
Because I think when I'm buying eggs, I think I'll be careful about what eggs I buy.
Okay.
So I've seen stuff like this, and it's
Okay.
pretty bad.
Okay, I'm going to be forthright with you. When I first started to address eating animals, I was looking at it from a health perspective. And I went down the road of trying to purchase free range. But what I was missing that whole time was the perspective of the animals. So if you think about those chickens on that free range farm, would you like to be any of those chickens? Because you have to understand the entire process. You would have your brothers stolen away from you, separated at birth. Your brothers are going to be thrown through a blender while they're 1 or 2 days old because they don't lay eggs. Okay, that's the start of the cycle for you. And then as you get older, while you're living out on a pasture, and this is only in a very minute circumstance, most farming is not like that. Okay, but even if you are talking about a small scale farm, you're going to be living out on a pasture, but you're held there against your will. You're being held captive, quite literally as a slave. Okay, you might be fed on time each day. You might even be given a name. But why are you there? You're there to be exploited. And eventually, in fact, it doesn't even take that long, you get murdered. While you're at a fraction of your lifespan, you'll get a knife slit across your throat. Because all of the chickens who lay eggs on a free-range farm, no matter how small the scale is, are murdered. They're all enslaved. They're all tormented, even if it looks like they live a good life on a pasture. And that's the truth. What I'm telling you is the objective truth about what happens from the animal's perspective. So would you like to live that life? Or would you rather not be put in that situation to begin with?
I don't know. I think we all have instincts which where you want to live. Have what's best as we can. And it's
And what about the animals? Do you think they have a will to live?
yes, I think they definitely want to live. And if someone said, like, it's hard to deal with chickens. Like, it's hard to ask them what they think. But I don't know. I think I'm still gonna eat meat, but I'm gonna try and do it as humane as I can.
So you've used the word humane. What does humane mean to you?
Try to give the chickens a good life.
What does the word humane mean to you?
Well, kind of like, I don't know really.
You don't know.
No.
It means to show compassion or to be benevolent. Do you think it's compassionate to enslave? And I'm just giving you the standard practices that occur in all situations. There's no way you can avoid what I'm telling you. Enslaved, tormented, and murdered. How do you murder humanely? Now, you know what would make this easier for you to understand? Imagine yourself in the animal's position. How do I murder you humanely?
I know electric shocks. I don't know.
Think about the question again. Okay? You're the victim we're talking about here. Is there a humane way for him to be murdered? I'm asking you now, just so you can help out maybe. There isn't, is there? Why do you say that?
Because, as you said, they have the will to, and no one wants to get killed.
Yeah, he's not consenting to being killed, is he? He's not saying, yes, I'm okay with being killed. You wouldn't say that, would you?
No.
I'm involving her now because maybe that can help you out, hearing it from her as well as me. It's just common sense that if you were in this animal's position, you would not find this acceptable. Even if you were killed painlessly and quickly, you value your life. You don't want your life to be taken.
I think if I were to die, I think I would like to die being eaten than just dying in a bush.
At a fraction of your lifespan? And are you saying that if you're in their position, you would actually prefer that? You would prefer to live like a chicken
No, I prefer
on this planet?
human.
Yeah, exactly. You would prefer to live as a human. So what do you think is harder? The choice as a human being to be vegan, or the lack of total choice that the animals have? Because they don't even have a choice, do they?
No.
What's harder, being a human being and making the choice to be vegan, or being a chicken, a pig, a cow, a turkey, or a fish?
Baby.
Yeah. Yeah, super easy to be a human being and be vegan, isn't it? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Am I missing something here, guys?
No.
Yeah. So do you know what the number one benefit is for being vegan? Can you take a guess?
Like you're saving animals' lives.
Yeah. What do you think it is? That as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you help like the industry to not like produce as much meat.
Yeah. Because you're no longer demanding
Yeah.
and they are supplying demand. That's basic economics.
Yeah.
You're one less person who's demanding it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me put it to you this way also. The number one benefit for the animals is that they're no longer tormented, abused, and harmed in any way because of you.
Yeah.
You're no longer the reason that animals suffer immensely, are tormented and murdered.
Yeah.
The benefit for you as individuals also is that when you say you're against animal abuse, you'll no longer be hypocrites.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you disagree with that? Does that sound fair to you? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Yeah? So what do you think you'll do about this then?
Try and eat less meat. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe even stop eventually. Stop.
Okay. Now, just to wrap this up and I'll let you guys go, is what you're seeing on the screens, is animal abuse and injustice to each of you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Would you take the position that you just took with any other injustice? Let's say you're the victims in this scenario.
Yeah.
Would you find it acceptable for your oppressor to try to harm you less and to do less harming of you? Or would you want them to stop entirely? Immediately.
Yeah.
So please don't compromise when it comes to these non-human animals, because they suffer just like you would if you were in their position. In all the ways that matter, there's no difference in our capacity to suffer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't compromise, if you were the victim, then do the same thing for them.
Yeah.
Okay? So now what do you think you'll do?
Stop eating meat.
Yeah. And not just meat, dairy, eggs. Yeah. Do you know what veganism means?
Yeah. No. Like animal produce.
No, animal products as well, like wool. You see that the UGG store? I'm going to leave you with a card, and I appreciate you both stopping.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm also just going to quickly tell you what's on it. So if you guys aren't yet convinced in being vegan as of today, after speaking with me and seeing the truth of what happens in the meat, dairy, and egg industries and other industries, then I want you to watch that speech at the top, which is called The Best Speech You Will Ever Hear. It's free to watch on YouTube. It's by a guy named Gary Yourofsky. And if you are game enough to watch the rest of what we're showing, these are scenes taken from this documentary called Dominion. And you can watch that on YouTube as well. It's free.
This is impressive. You doing this? I respect that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. If you guys ever want to join us and get the word out, please do. Once you become vegan, you say that this is impressive, but if you don't want to necessarily do this form of activism, that's also fine. But just speak up whenever you have the opportunity. Say something about this, because their voices won't be heard until we speak up. All right, thanks for stopping, guys. I just make a couple things about that, but then we should both get up. Okay, so I just want to point out that that's actually old footage now. That's 2020, 21 in Melbourne City. So the outreach protocol has actually been refined even further. On the card, for example, we don't actually have the links written on there anymore. It's just the one link, because we want this to be as simple and as easy as possible for people to follow up on. That link, cubeoftruth.com, takes you to the things that I mentioned to them at the end. Also, now the outreach protocol is a lot more simple and easy to follow. It's quicker. And Yeah, and I just want you guys to pay attention to the outreach footage that we have coming, because we've recorded so much during One Damn Week and the other actions that we've done recently. So if you're not following Anonymous for the Voiceless on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, do that immediately, because you will see a lot of great outreach content coming, which shows you the more up-to-date version of the outreach protocol, but the principles are the same, which is why we're showing you this now. I also want to point out that communication skills are important when you're doing outreach. So what I did in that interaction was I involved both participants, both people that I was speaking with in the interaction. I wasn't just talking to the one person that was answering the questions. I actually could have done more of that. I could have asked, so how do you feel? What about, I also asked her how she felt about animal abuse, and she answered, but then for most of the conversation, the girl was actually being pretty quiet. But that's because she was a bit shy. So I could have engaged with her a bit more, but then I involved her when that guy was struggling with understanding how serious this was, because I could tell by her body language that she was getting it. So I said, well, maybe you can help out with the humane murder thing, and she actually did, and then he got the point. So it's important that you involve everyone that you're speaking with in the interaction. Don't let people be silent throughout the whole thing. Engage with them. Okay, now we'll open up the Q&A. So we're going to take questions. But let me just check in. Sylvia, how long do we have? Do we have to get out of here by a certain time? Half an hour?
Half an hour? So 1:30.
All right, so...
Okay, perfect. And we do have some seats here. If those of you at the back, if you want to sit down, there are some free seats here at the front. Why? True.
Ready?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, for the workshop. It's amazing that you created this organization. And so I love the direct and straightforward approach. There is only one thing that I wanted to point out. First of all, I have a t-shirt that says, "Eat pussy, not animals," so I guess I'm not going to use it anymore. And
Did you used to wear it at the Cube?
No,
Okay,
no, never. So, because you said that it's not good to ask people if they like animals and what they think about animals. And I agree with that. Like, being vegan is not about liking animals or what you feel about animals. It's just behaving respectfully towards their life. But are we not putting aside the fact that people is truly brainwashed and they're truly experiencing cognitive dissonance? Like, for example, I am not a natural empath. I have been, people will confirm that people around me that sometimes I'm cold, I'm not too emotional. I've been said that I'm a narcissist. Before making the connection with animals, I was a true speciesist. And then that's probably because of what I've seen when I was young. When I was young, I had a lot of family farms. So rabbits were in cages, hens in cages, and I would see them being slaughtered and murdered. I've seen a couple of times pigs being slaughtered. So saying that, and even in other situations in life, like I would make jokes about my cousin that had a rabbit as a pet. I said, this is stupid. We should kill it and put it in an oven with potatoes. So, and I needed to hear the words, because what I did have empathy for was injustice. I did have empathy for injustice. I didn't like hearing my family making jokes about racism and sexism, right? So I had that empathy against injustices, but I didn't see animals as like me. I didn't see them. I saw them as something below me, something that's there for me, whether it's a pet that gives me company or an animal that gives me food. So I needed the words of Joy Carpstrong, that reminded me that they are individuals, they are people, you know, they're experiencing life, and this is where I clicked, right? So something that I do now always during my outreach, and I've done a lot, like in the beginning my outreach was, do you think that's okay? Do you think it's okay to be part of it? You know, what are you going to do about it? You know, so in the beginning was very like this, my outreach. But now I try to understand what is the view of people towards animals, right? I try to understand if they do see them as individual. You know, sometimes you talk with a slaughterhouse worker, you know, and yeah, I think it's important to understand what's their view about animals before moving the conversation forward. Even though I do think it's still a shortcut to just put them in the victim position, right? I do think that's a shortcut to be more direct. But do they get it, right? So that's what I'm asking for. Is it a waste of time to help them empathize to the fact that the animal's experience is the same as what they would feel in that position? That's it.
Okay, that's it?
Yeah.
Yep. I think I get the question. So obviously it's okay to see where they're at, because we want to meet them where they're at, because everyone might be in a different place, right? Their view towards animals, how they view animals, what they think about the animals, whether they recognize animals as individuals or not, whether they respect animals. So this is going to be different for each person. So it's okay to try to figure out where they're at, if that's what you're asking. It's okay, and you can do so by asking questions or following the steps. Even following the steps will give you that information regardless. But whether they get it or not, again, it will come down to that person. So you said you think this is a shortcut. Well, it's not just a shortcut. It's just that, as you know, we have very short amount of time with people on the street. Sometimes you literally have 5 to 10 minutes with each person. And if you want to go down the route of, like, you know, using a little bit of psychology and getting to the bottom of it, sorry, then it might actually waste your time. So what you want to do is you want to follow the steps, and then if something comes up and you want to ask an extra question or make a comment, that's totally fine. That's what I was trying to say. Don't feel like you have to follow the exact same order every single time. But when it comes to the animals and their rights, I can guarantee you, whether they realize it or not, but 99.9% of non-vegans do not recognize animals as individuals who deserve to have their most basic rights. So they don't actually, whether they realize it or not, they don't see them as individuals who deserve respect. So have that in the back of your mind, but then if you want to go further into where that person is, sure, ask them questions, but don't do it by trying to figure out if they like animals or if they have compassion, if they have empathy. I mean, even empathy is a bit tricky, because we think, well, you need to have empathy to be able to put yourself in the other person's position. And that's what we're basically doing when we say, you know, what if you were in the animal's position? What if you were in the victim's position? How urgently would you want this to end? That's basically empathy. So you want to see if that person has the ability to imagine themselves in that position. And what I usually say following this question, I say to people, I know it's probably impossible for you to imagine yourself in a cell like the animals, you know, and imagine what they go through, because how can you try to imagine that? It's so far away from the reality of our lives. But if you try really hard and put yourself in their position, this is normally how I say it. So you are trying to see if that person has empathy or not, but that's as far as you can go with them. You don't want to get too deep into the rest of it. So I'll just, do you want to follow? Before I pass it on to Paul, so the way we're going to do the Q&A, you guys ask a question, we both are going to give our answers, I mean, if we have something to add. I just want to ask a couple of things, if I can get everyone's attention. So I can hear a little bit of talking in the back. Just because we have interpreters here as well, and I don't want you guys, when you're asking a question, to be, distracted, and I want to be able to hear everything clearly for us, and then for you guys the answers. If you guys need to discuss anything, if I can ask you to go out or do it very quietly to make sure nobody else is distracted. And the second thing, when you want to get up and ask a question, firstly, actually, we only have about 20 minutes now. Firstly, we want to ask you to keep it to questions only. So if you have feedback, if you have something that's not related to what we covered, if you have a statement to make, if you can do it after. Right now, we just want to answer as many questions as we can. So each person who gets up, if they can ask only one question and keep it as concise and as short and to the point as possible so that we can get through as many questions as we can. Thank you.
All right, so what I would say to that, Stefano, is that you pointed out that you're not an empath, but then as soon as someone pointed out to you that these individuals are individuals, that you got it. Well, if someone like you who isn't an empath can get that, then people in general should be able to get that. And we do point out that they're individuals throughout the interaction. That's why we ask them as an individual to imagine themselves in the victim's position. And I also want to point out that I think it's impossible for someone to truly understand the severity of the injustice if they do not put themselves in the victim's position. It's easy from the victimizer's position to say that this is wrong, that it's not wrong, or to say whatever. But unless you are imagining yourself in the victim's position, how can you truly connect to how serious this is, So when you do put them in the victim's position, that is in fact pointing out that these animals are individuals also. That's why you can put yourself in their position, because you're an individual yourself. And we're animals too. I've actually gotten to the point with my outreach, and maybe I'll change this in future, I don't know, where if the person I'm speaking with is unwilling to accept or admit or acknowledge that we are animals too, because some people from a religious point of view will say, no, we're not animals, they're animals, we're different. I just won't even engage with them anymore, because how can we reason with someone like that? So my point is if we're animals and they're animals too, we're individuals, they're individuals too. So that's why it should be easy to connect, put yourself in the victim's position. Does that satisfy your question? Yeah, cool. Let's move on. Yes, go on.
Hi. I understand wording is important. So I would like to know if I can call them animal abusers instead of stop abusing animals. And the other question is about plants having feelings. I tend to speak about numbers like, okay, plant activist. If you want to save plants, eat plants, because plants are fed to animals. So I want to know if those two are right. And I can continue or stop. Thank you.
We do call them animal abusers, because at the point where you say that you're against animal abuse, the number one benefit is you no longer have to be a hypocrite. That's calling them an animal abuser. And if they say, well, I guess I'm a hypocrite, and they accept the hypocrisy, I've got a video that I need to upload soon where I do this as an example. I say, just so you are aware, you're not just a hypocrite, you're also an animal abuser is what I'm saying to you. And so we, in effect, do actually say that. So yes, of course you can say that. If we're not saying that, then what are we saying actually when we call them out for being a hypocrite? And then calling them a plants rights activist is fine. I'm not opposed to, I think that's fine. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. All right. Did you want to say anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to add, basically what you were asking is literally saying, well, you're an animal abuser, yeah? Yeah, and we're both okay with that. And also what you can say, like Paul said, is, well, what I'm saying is you're actually an animal abuser. Are you okay with that? You can do it like that as well. All right, next question. Do you have the mic?
Thanks. The question is, what do I do during an outreach if what do I do during an outreach if I don't know what to say or if I lose control of the conversation?
Can you repeat that?
What should I do if I don't know what to say? If I get lost and I'm losing control of the conversation, how do I get back?
It's a little bit different. So if you lose the control, meaning that person is controlling the conversation, or you hit a wall, basically. Can you give me an example of what they say so that I can help you better?
I don't know, maybe they say something that I was not expecting, or maybe I'm not prepared to answer to that.
I see. Okay. That's a really good question. And we normally do cover this. Well, actually, in the briefing, I always cover it. But one thing I say, and then I'll come back to you, is when you're doing outreach, and Paul said, do not interrupt any outreach conversations, and we should never do that. It's disrespectful to the outreacher as well. But it also, if you've got 2 or 3 outreachers outreaching one person, then it's like, well, we're ganging up on them. So one thing I want to say is I might be doing outreach, and then him as the bystander might ask me something, and I actually don't know the answer, like you said. You may have never heard of it, you may actually don't know the answer, and you may get nervous, and you think, oh, what do I do now? It's okay to say, actually, that's a good question. I don't know the answer, but I can find someone who can answer that question. And then maybe it's not that important for them. So maybe they say, oh, it's okay, and then you continue. But if it is important for them, it's okay to go and find someone, whoever's around, and say, hey, do you know how to answer this question, this specific question? So it's okay. Don't feel bad for that. It does happen sometimes. So that's one thing. I'm saying this to say, another reason why you should never interrupt an outreach conversation is, what if I was listening to Paul's outreach conversation and then the bystander asked him something and I thought, oh, Paul's response was not good. I have a better response. And then I'm like, I'm going to jump in and say, actually, blah, 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 and take over. That's so disrespectful to Paul, even if his response wasn't the best one. So please don't do that. But to come back to your question, if at any point you feel like you didn't expect it, there's no one around, and you don't know, just bring it back to the flowchart, okay? Do it tactfully as you can. Don't give away the fact that you're nervous or, you lack confidence. Just be confident and bring it back. The best thing you can do, point at the footage. Maybe in that moment, there will be something really good on the screen, and you can point at it. Maybe it's the chicks going through the macerator. Maybe it's the dairy footage. Maybe it's like a very catching image, and you can point at it and bring it back to the footage, and then bring it back to the flowchart. Wherever you are in the flowchart, whatever step, you can even go one step back, just so you can, gather yourself and bring it back. Just remember, you're always in charge of the conversation. Worst thing that could happen is that person is going to either walk away from you, or you're going to be in a position where you don't know the answer. So what? So don't get nervous. That's the worst thing. So just be confident. You always have the footage to refer to, and always the flowchart.
Yeah, and just remember that no matter what I'm assuming you're referring to excuses that they might bring up, or arguments, right? Yeah, so just remember that the excuses that non-vegans use will always become so easy to address as soon as you put them in the victim's position. How does this argument hold if we're talking about you being the victim? That usually addresses any argument, so keep it simple. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I would like you to explain a little bit more the PETA excuse.
So people say, oh, but PETA though, they do this and they do that, and I disagree with it, and that's why they're not vegan. That's the excuse. And then they try to compare us to PETA. Well, we're not PETA, and even if we were... Oh, PETA is an organization... You don't know who PETA is? Oh, okay, so PETA is the biggest animal rights organization in terms of resources and funding, and they've been around the longest. We're the most global, but they're the biggest in terms of like how long they've been around and their resources and funding. And they've got the biggest reputation, I would say, because of that. They do a lot of marketing campaigns and billboards and things like this. And people try to hide behind the way that they carry out their activism as an excuse to not be vegan. That's one of the common ones we hear. All right, next question.
Okay, I was just asking for how to deal with the silence, because we seem to care about details, right? So
about the what, sorry?
The silence, how to deal with silence. When I am doing an outreach with a person on the street and they keep in silence, like I can sense that they are experiencing, for example, an emotional moment, and they are connecting actually with the images. How should I deal with this? Like, I would think about let some time pass and then getting back to the flow chart, or is it okay also to reflect these emotions to validate them, or is it a bit too much, like getting away from the animal theme?
So are you referring to people watch footage and allowing them to watch it? Or are you talking about after you've asked a question and letting them absorb the question?
Yeah, yeah, this, for example, going to the next questions, or if it's okay to reflect their emotions, like allowing them, feeling them, letting them feel like it's okay to experience this emotion. It's hard to watch this, or is it maybe too compassionate?
Well, let's keep it simple. So stick to the flow chart, but yeah, allow them a moment to absorb the footage. Of course, if they're watching the footage and they're like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. Maybe take a moment to explain, yeah, this is what happens in the dairy industry. You know, explain it and say, isn't this wrong? Is it safe to say that you're against animal abuse? Get back to so bring it back to the flow chart. You want to keep something in mind here. We don't have a lot of time with people on the streets. So we want to get through the process in a timely manner. We don't have much time with them, so we want them to be vegan today, and we don't have much time to achieve that. Most people don't want to stand on the streets with us for very long as well. They're on their way somewhere. So even if they do stop and they're getting emotional over what they're watching, just keep that in mind, that you will have to progress the conversation, and that's your job as the activist.
Yeah, and as I was saying, in an outreach conversation, you want to have a balance between asking questions, lecturing, and silence. So silence is actually a good thing sometimes, not for too long. So if there is silence and it's them showing their emotions during that time, or it's them processing the information or the footage, that's a good thing. Just allow it to happen. Usually what I do while that's happening, if there is silence, I don't try to break the silence immediately, like as soon as they go quiet. I look at the footage. Well, I don't tend to look at the footage. I look above it as if I'm looking at the footage. But I let them watch, and then if they don't show anything or ask anything, maybe after 30 seconds or a minute, it depends. You can't really put a time on it. Then I'll come back with another question, or I make another statement. So it's okay to let them show their emotions, and you can also like recognize their emotions. You can say something as well. For example, how many times have you been doing outreach, even from the beginning, but the person is crying, like they're just bawling their eyes out? I sometimes offer them a hug. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm a human, they're a human. They're showing their emotions. They're going through the process, and a lot of times they're dealing with something for the first time. They've never seen this footage. They've never been faced with the reality of it. So sometimes I say, can I give you a hug? And yeah, they love it because it's comforting. And then we'll go back to the conversation. Or their emotion may not be crying or sadness, it might be anger. Whatever it is, you can say something about it and then bring it back. Does that help? Okay, next question. I think we might have time for one more.
Which one?
Last one.
Right over there.
If it's quick, we might actually have time for another one, but we'll see.
I just wanted to ask if there's ever any times where it might be appropriate to use the words either Holocaust or genocide to describe what's happening.
Did you hear it? Oh, okay, because I didn't.
It's totally appropriate. We need to explain exactly what's happening and use the correct language. If we stop using the correct language, we get further and further away from how serious this is and connecting people to how serious this is. Call it a Holocaust, it is. It's not the Jewish Holocaust, it's the animal Holocaust, which is actually the longest standing Holocaust in history. That's how you should talk about this. Call it what it is.
Just on that point, as the last question as well, I do want to bring something up. So as we were watching Gary's video, and that's what he was saying as well, and we always say this, don't shy away from the truth. Say it how it is. Using words like genocide, Holocaust, rape, we do not shy away from. Now, I understand someone as an individual activist might have reservations in using these words or other words. We do understand that, and we respect that. So if you, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable calling it rape, it's okay. We're not forcing you to use rape. It is rape, but if you don't feel comfortable, if it's traumatic for yourself or somebody else, then it's okay. Say it however you want, but if you want to know our stance, we both do use these phrases, and we actually encourage you to say it how it is. So do use these words. There's nothing wrong with it. When it comes to the Holocaust, it just explains the action. It's not a trademark or anything. Even though people might get triggered and they might want to argue about that, and they might want to convince you that you should not be using it. Same thing with rape. We have had many debates over the use of this word, and I do see the argument, but I'm still not convinced that we should stop using these words. So yes, we do encourage you to use them. And that's the end of it. Okay, sure.
Okay, so we're going to wrap this up, but I just want to say that, first of all, a huge thank you to everyone who organized this, Cristiano, Sylvia, and all of the others. Thank you so much. This is amazing. I tried to do a head count earlier, and I think there's about 140 of us here. Is that right or wrong? 150 of us here. This is epic. And I just want to point out that Sylvia has largely funded a lot of things that have gone into this action. So I just want to point out that the room rental for this workshop, the translators that are here doing an amazing job at making sure this is understandable to all of you who do not speak English, the earphones that you're using for that, the lanyards for the organizers, badges, cards, and other printing material, and also the dinner room rental. So if you'd consider donating, we're sort of asking you guys to donate €5. If you want to donate more, it's up to you. But if you would consider doing that directly to Sylvia, that would be a huge help for this action. I also think we should take a moment to acknowledge what happened with those 11 pigs recently. We made a post on the AV page just yesterday about this. But this situation in Italy really disturbs me, and I think that since we're doing an action in Italy, I think we should take a moment to acknowledge that it happened, and now that it happened, and since we are such... we're against huge forces, powerful forces here, and I think we should use the murder of these pigs to fuel our fire and never forget what happened to them. And obviously we have animals that are being murdered every second of every minute of every hour of every day in this country at the hands of humans. But these 11 pigs symbolize something, which is that even when they're rescued from slaughterhouses and farms, they're still not safe in this world. They're still not safe from human oppression and human violence. This cannot make us feel hopeless. This has to fuel our fire and make us stronger. So, a moment of silence. Shall we? Now?
Yes, 1 minute. Okay.
Yeah, I think we should take a moment of silence. And again, the objective here is to make this strong, to make us stronger, and to remember this perhaps when we go out there today. So if we can just take a minute of silence. Standing up, that's a good idea.
Thanks.
Thank you.